Hi and welcome to Glendale TAFE. I'm Andrew. Today we're going to be looking at the benefits of using the air drawbar system on like this mill here, and the benefits of that and how we go about the correct mounting and dismounting procedure using this piece of equipment. For starters, the benefit of using the air drawbar is that we don't have to hop up on a step like here to my left, the traditional step where we'd hop up on the step and we'd use a spanner and we'd have to reach up so forth and do up and undo the drawbar to mount the cutter. You'll notice on the top of this head we've got this black unit. That's the air motor, I should say, which works a bit like an impact gun or an air ratchet. It actually rotates the drawbar and impacts at the same time, and we need the impacting so as we can dismount the cutter from the taper, because we all know that the taper actually locks into place. What we need to do is understand how it works before we use it properly. And the air service unit over here to my right is the first component we need to look at. The whole air drawbar runs on air, of course, and we've got an air service unit, and before we can start we need to make sure that we've got around 700 kPa or about 100 pound on the gauge. Once we've got that, the air comes through that into this terminal box here, and in the terminal box we've got a solenoid valve, and when we press the button on the control panel, the solenoid valve over here opens and allows air through to the main unit on the mill head. That's the components explained. What we might do now is might have a look at the mounting and dismounting of a cutter using the air drawbar. So we'll have to come around and have a look at the control panel. The mounting process for mounting the cutter in the spindle nose of the mill. You'll notice on the control panel here I've got a couple of buttons here. Alright, one is for the raise position or mounting position, and one is for the dismounting. We've got you'll notice that there's an arrow on either so we won't get confused. We're going to be using these in a moment, but first of all we want to come around here and have a closer look at the spindle nose of the milling machine, because there's some safety issues associated with the mounting. Now you'll notice that on the cutter itself here, or the arbor rather, there's a slot for the keys. There's keys in the spindle nose. Now if I mount this incorrectly, if I hold it up here and hold my hand there, there's a chance that when I do the cutter up I could pinch my fingers, or at the very least or do myself some damage. So when we're mounting the cutter we need to actually hold our hand well away from any possible pinch points. In this case here, I'd like us all to use a piece of insertion rubber under the cutter. So what do we do next? We've got to roughly align the key up by eye, and I'm going to jog this button and raise the cutter up into the taper in the spindle until it roughly locates with the cutter. And I'm going to do that before I drive it fully home, just to make sure that the keys align. Right, you'll notice there now that the cutter is loose, all right, but we can see that it's well and truly aligned with the keys here. So what I can do now is I can continue to raise that cutter until it makes another sound. The sound will change, and we know then that the cutter is fully raised. Okay, now you can hear the cutter, the sound of the air drawbar change. We know now that that cutter is firmly positioned in place. Now one thing we've got to remember when we want to insert a cutter is that the quill can be moved down and up. You'll only be able to insert a cutter when the quill is in the fully raised position. We need to fully raise and lock that handle, and then we can insert the cutter, and the drawbar, the spline and the drawbar will meet up with the air unit on the top of the mill head. And the same is said for when we disassemble or dismount the cutter. So now that that's in place, we're going to look at how we dismount the cutter. And to dismount the cutter, it's pretty much the opposite to the mounting. We make sure that we've got the quill in the fully raised position. We place our piece of rubber underneath, and we disengage the cutter by pressing the black button in this case and winding it out of place. Now, you'll notice in this particular case, it's taken a long time to dismount that. That tells me that maybe the air compressor is not on, or we're getting down on air. So we need to make sure that that's correct. And you'll notice in the back of the workshop there's a red light on the wall. We need to make sure the compressor's on and we've got enough air in the system, because it should really dismount twice that speed. When we're using a different type of cutter, and I've got a boring head here, you can see with the boring head there's a lot of room there to grip. Okay, when we're mounting a cutter like this, no need to use the rubber matting. We can simply hold it, and if we mount that like this, there's plenty of room for us to get our hand away from the pinch points of the cutter. All right, so just in summary, what we've got to be careful of is, one, we've got to have the machine turned on, we've got to have enough air pressure. We must, most importantly, have a piece of rubber or something underneath the cutter so as we can get our hands away from those pinch points. Another thing we need to be aware of is that over here, and also we need to be aware of that the quill needs to be in the fully raised position, and when we're working on the head here, just be mindful of other people around you. You don't want to find that someone comes around and presses one of these buttons while you've got your hands around the quill mechanism. And that's enough for today. Hopefully, if you've got any more questions, you should be able to talk through with your teacher, and he should be able to give you a demonstration on how the operation works. You'll be signing a standard operating procedure. Please ask if you've got any questions. That's enough for me today. If you see me around, ask me and I'll give you a run through.